Yeah, cool. I'm also going to bring up the other cast members who are here, so I'm going to go through you guys quick because there's a lot of them. So we'll bring up Paul McGillion, Kurt, Max Runte, Max Haynes, I see you right next to him as well, Shane, Dave, RJ, come on up here as well, Joe Buffalo, come on up here as well. I think that's the whole crew. Okay. Yeah, I got Kurt. Okay. Oh, Sara, of course, and Ben. Sorry, guys, I'm a little fried right now.
We want to open it to the audience, of course, but I just want to start with you, Kevan. For us who've followed your work, some of you may have as well, it was interesting to see a story of yours being set in the sports world. How did you come to that?
Yeah, the film was never, I didn't set out to make like a hockey movie, quote unquote. I was interested when I started this film in terms of systemic issues of violence and culture and talking about it in a broader way. And a big part of choosing hockey for this film was I wanted kind of like the largest cultural institution in this country. And I think hockey probably is that. And it was a way to sort of look at these broader issues within Canadian identity and Canadian history, because it's something that is very ingrained in that identity for us. So, and I kind of love the fact that it's a hockey film that's not really a hockey film. There's sort of like a perverse sense of satisfaction for me in that as a first feature. So yeah, that was the entry point. I wasn't really interested in spending 2 years making a movie about whether fighting was good or bad in hockey. It was much more to look at what came on pretty well with hockey is this idea of like how people can be disposable, and also this idea that I was really interested in terms of us cultivating evil or bad people, like casting them that way, which I think has a lot to do with this sort of convenience of conscience for a general public, where if something bad or violent happens, if we can blame one person for that, we don't have to look so much at ourselves. So,
thank you. And Jared, to pick up on that, the performance is extremely potent, yet very internalized too. How did you approach that role and work with Kevan on devising that?
With Kevan, he kind of just sets the environment. So he's got the tone set, and it's like a simple process where you go in and you just live every moment. So for me, going into it was all about just being mindful and being aware of where I was and just living the moment authentically.
Thank you. Let's open it to the audience. Yes. The person who's waving the most at the back.
Jared, have you ever played hockey?
You notice how they cut away every time I'm skating? That's since I was about 5.
Yep, we'll repeat it after you.
Interesting in movies have almost no music. What drove that choice?
Almost no music in the film, and what drives for it?
yeah, I've done that in a lot of the short films that I do. I think that I'm a strong believer in ambiguity with intent. I think if you just make something that's that's just full of ambiguity without a lot of intention, it's actually a really crappy thing to do to your audience. I think it's unfair. But a big part of making that ambiguity work, and hopefully it's a tool to engage people, is having them react in a way that you're not forcing something on them. And I love music, I love composition and score, but I find too often, and it's something in the small amounts of music we use, we were really careful about this. I don't want to shape an audience's emotion with music. It's a really powerful force to do that quite quickly, and that's how it's often used. But I think it's a little bit lazy sometimes. That's not to discredit people who use it well, but in my work, I don't want to give people clear answers. I want them to have to kind of wrestle with what they're experiencing, and I think that often music becomes a little too direct in that way. It kind of really ushers you into a specific space.
Yep, right here.
I'm just wondering how much you do from actual accounts of incidents like this in terms of how isolated the players by actually missing, not knowing what happened to the player, not having conversations with themselves involved in the so just to know how real that part was and
First of all, she loved it. The second, if you drew on, or how much did you draw on a real case of something like this happening?
Yeah, and the isolation factor is a big part of this narrative and it working. And so I did quite a bit of research in terms of just reading into any of these stories I could find. There's a few really good books out there, actually, the profile players. I don't know if anyone's ever read Boy on Ice, but it's about Derek Bogard, who was an enforcer. It's a really very different than our story, but very powerful in terms of some of those things. And so yeah, it was a combination of doing that research up front and then also having it operate in the way that we needed to tell the story. And like I said, I wanted to be very true to the sport and to hockey, but I also didn't want to get too obsessed with like insanely nitty-gritty details because I wanted to be able to kind of transcend that a little bit. So some of this stuff was even looking at like incidents that had happened in the military and that sort of thing, which was always a parallel even from the point of inspiration for this. There's actually this incredibly fantastic and criminally underseen Earl Morris film called Standard Operating Procedure, which was a big initial influence in sort of planting the seed. But it is a delicate balance of, I think with the isolation and the cruelty of all these people rejecting him, it was something that, it was probably the part of the script that took the most time to write because you have to make sure that the motivation of those characters isolating him is grounded in their reality, because I think if you betray that, then it just becomes cruelty for cruelty's sake, and I don't think it really says all that much. And I don't want to put that guy through that for no reason. So yeah, so it's a delicate balance of knowing that, like, I think that sense of cruelty is more just a self-serving thing of people trying to protect their own interests, as opposed to him becoming this sort of pariah that is so toxic that everyone just kind of hates him. It needed to be guided by some sort of real motivation for those characters.
Yeah, he never utters the word dad or mom in the film.
Never utters the word dad or mom in the film.
Yeah, that's a good observation, actually. No, that is something that in terms of his home life, I wanted to establish that there's this distance, and you know, Jared's character, Tyson, his biggest problem is his inability to communicate, and I wanted to show that that was something that had started a long time ago, and to me that final act, the end, the ambiguity of the horn, actually has a lot to do with him asking for help, because he's this kid who's only ever really learned how to communicate through violence. And so when these things get really desperate for him and he is really struggling, that's still his only communicative tool. And so that violence then becomes enacted upon himself as a way to ask. So the mom or dad thing was not to make the family so cold, but a bit more of this, of showing that there's not really this tender family there. It's a bit more old school in this sort of, probably a bit more old school patriarchal sort of idea of what family is.
Yeah, sorry.
To better understand the silence of the film, I mean, I think it was more than just a lack of a soundtrack, and I don't mean lack in a bad way, but the silence made everything that the actors did all the more powerful, regardless of whether it's gesture or whatnot. But I like, was the silence sort of a character itself? Was it a metaphor? Like, what was?
Yeah, no, I've used it a lot, and it increases. Like I've always thought of this film as almost being divided in half, as opposed to the sort of 3-act progression. I always thought that in terms of even designing the script, the hit marks this moment. And it's to your point specifically, the moment after the hit, which is one of our loudest scenes in the stadium, it's 3 shots of like close to actually true silence in the house. And to me, that it has sort of 2 functions in terms of like this sense of a vacuum, which he kind of talks about when he's talking about his fear of silence, which is something I actually really had when I was a kid, which is tied into like the finality of death. And death doesn't have to actually, in this case, I didn't want it just to be about the character dying, but like his hopes, his dreams, those sorts of things dying. And then just the fact that isolation to these other points was so important. And when you put him in that much silence, it actually becomes this massive presence. And I find it like overwhelming often. And so I was trying to use it as a narrative tool in that way.
Yes, right there.
One of my favorite things about the film is that how the main character's not able to advocate for himself or like express himself and make himself heard, except for the one scene with his friend who fixing his window. And I'm just wondering if the actors can talk about like what they're sharing in that scene that allows him to like expose himself and say that he's suffering. It was amazing.
Did you hear the back? I'll take that as a yes. Yeah, I think we're good.
What developed there was a bond between me and Joe's character. He was a pariah. He said that he had left the rigs and got into some trouble and kind of just came here to clear his head, and I was in the same zone as him at the time. So as we warmed up to each other, I think the booze and everything just eventually just broke me down and just opened up to him and felt a safe zone with him.
Yeah, mainly it was just like accepting, like being ousted from like the situation that he was in, you know what I mean? Like being ousted from the scene and then like just being open, being accepting, And it was just like, well, I've been there, kind of thing. That's the role I was playing, so I was just like, I empathize, So it was like, it was easy.
Me and Joe hit it off right away. We got like, I don't know, similar things in our history, so we developed a bond quick on set. Like it was instant as soon as we met each other. It was right away, there was trust, So that allows you to be free in the scene and just start flowing. So there's a mix between improv and script, and we just made it work,
I just want to say, by the way, Joey, you bring such warmth to this movie. We're really happy to have you.
This is also Joe's first film. He's never acted before, so he's
I think we have time for one more, so yes, right there. Just to repeat, ultimately, how did you come around with the title Hello Destroyer?
Yeah, it's actually a funny one. I'm someone who has like incredibly long-winded answers for most things, as people who've seen me do these things before. And I love to talk and I love context. But to be honest, it was one of the only elements of the film that was like an aesthetic that was just in my head almost right away. I mean, there was the aspect of like, it's so, like to your point, it's such a claustrophobic film and it's so much about this character, and I kind of like the idea of like Hello Destroyer as this introduction to a person, this introduction to a character in that way. But frankly, it was one of those things that just like the moment it popped in my head like before I'd written the film, like I knew what I wanted to do, and it was just always there. There was something I liked about it. There's something about like just even visually I like about it, and it's a bit peculiar, which I think fits the film in terms of I think the film hopefully subverts some expectations of what people are actually going to be seeing. So yeah, it's less of my deep context on that one, but
that's it for us. We didn't get everybody to talk because Kevan does that. We want to thank everybody for being here. It means a lot for you all to be at the festival with us. Thank you, everyone. This is the first screening of the Featerstonhaugh people. Thank you.
you guys can vote for the film if you love it. So that would be great.